Wow, what a great crowd. This is incredible. Wow. Well, welcome everyone to our Tales from All Over the Place. Four of us are going to do some storytelling tonight. We're so excited to have a great full house, practically full house. We want to thank the Weaverville Center for Creative and Healthy Living. They're the ones that sponsor all of the programs here at our beautiful community center that the town of Weaverville has built for us. We miss Tom Balistreri, who is the leading light of the Weaverville Center for Creative and Healthy Living. He is at every program, but his wife just had knee replacement this week and he is not here. So I'm going to try to do my best Tom Balistreri imitation and remind you all, first of all, if you don't get the newsletter from the Weaverville Center for Creative and Healthy Living, you can get a card in the back and send an email, and you can get twice monthly emails from the center. We also have appreciation baskets in the back. So if you really enjoy what you see tonight, you can pony up a little money and maybe we can. And we've got some other stuff coming up too. Next week, we have a really exciting program with the author Madison Brightwell. Her new book is called The World Beyond the Redbud Tree. And she is going to do an interview with a journalist here. She'll perform an extract from the book with help of local actresses Melissa Stone and Allie McCauley. And then there's going to be a Q&A with the audience. So she's an author, actress. She's lived in Weaverville for 5 years. She's performed in the Laramie Project here, also at the Cafe, which was another theatrical production we had here. So please turn out for her next week. It should be really exciting. But we're going to get started, and our first teller is Cindy Berryman-Fink. And she has been a Weaverville resident for the past 12 years. And she's retired as a communications professor at the University of Cincinnati. And she's been doing storytelling for the last few years at the request of her talented husband, who will also be a teller tonight. And Cindy is going to start and surprise us with a pretty exciting story. So welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. Thank you. I am a crazy pet lover. I'm not a lover of crazy pets, but I'm a crazy lover of all pets. And it started when I was a kid. I grew up in an old blue-collar textile manufacturing city of Fall River, Massachusetts. And we lived in the second story of a 3-story house that we called the tenement house. And one day, Mom came home from work carrying a small corrugated cardboard box, and there was something moving inside. She brought home a puppy for me. It was tiny, it was black, silky, long black fur. I named him Mike, my first dog ever. Now, this was the 1950s, late 1950s, and this was long before dogs had their own clothes, their own rooms, their own strollers, their own chiropractors. Many of you might remember that dogs could roam the neighborhood at will. So the dog needed to go out to do business. You open the door, you take them down the flight of stairs, they go out for the day, come back when they're hungry. Well, one day, Mike disappeared. And there I am, 7 years old or so. I'm wandering the streets of the city, wandering the sidewalks, yelling, Mike, Mike, where are you? Mike, come home. Well, Mike never came home. A few weeks or so later, I overhear my dad. He's reading the newspaper, and he says to my mom, hey, good. It says here that there's dog snatchers selling dogs to Harvard Medical School. I would lay awake at night envisioning Mike alive on a table with white-coated avid researchers working on them, experimenting on them. So I guess I learned at a young age that being a crazy pet lover can bring pain as well as joy. And then a few years after that, we moved to the town next door, which was totally opposite. It was a town called Westport, Massachusetts, 7,000 people back then, lobster fishing, dairy farming community. And there we had a white farmhouse, not a farm, just a farmhouse, and about an acre of land. And one day I go into the yard and I look into the field next to our house with the New England stone wall, look at the field, and there is a black Angus bull. Well, I'm 10 years old, I'm still a crazy pet lover. I've got a new friend. I run into the house and I say, Mom, Dad, there's a bull in the field, come see. So they come out and they look over the wall and they say to me, don't go near him. He's dangerous and he could kill you. Well, that didn't stop me. I named him Harry. And basically, Harry was kind of boring because all he would do is walk the field all day to head down, munching grass. But I soon learned to pick leaves from the tree in my yard and sit on the wall offering him leaves. And he'd be way off in the field. I'd yell, Harry, Harry, got some yummy leaves for you. He'd come running and he'd eat the leaves. And it wasn't very long before the minute I come out of the house, he'd come to the edge of the wall waiting for the leaves. And he was big. I mean, he was 1,200 pounds, black, big eyes. And he would let me, I'd sit on the wall. I knew not to get in the field with him, but I'd sit on the wall and he'd let me scratch behind his ear. And he'd lean into it, you know, the way a dog will when you scratch behind the ear. And he'd take the leaves from my hands. And I loved looking into his big eyes, and he has these big, long eyelashes. Now, we had learned that he was in the field because he was a 4-H project for Russell Vincelette, the teenager that lived down the road. So Harry was my friend a year or more or so. And one day I go out in the field. Harry's not there. Go in the house and I tell my parents, Harry's not there. They're like, oh, we don't know. A few days later, Mrs. Vincelette comes to the house with 2 pounds of ground beef. My parents made burgers. They're eating the burgers going, oh, yum, oh, this is the best ground beef we've ever had. You can't buy this at the A&P. And I'm sitting there quietly sobbing into my Chef Boyardee SpaghettiOs. Now, my parents weren't mean. I'm kind of pointing them out kind of mean here, but they were just these practical New Englanders, you know. You hear that there's dog snatchers, you say there's dog snatchers. You get the ground beef, it's better than the A&P, you eat it, you know. So I learned at age 10 to not make pets of the livestock. So let's fast forward now about past 31 years. So Chuck and I spent 31 years together in Cincinnati, raising a couple of sons. And we had lots of dogs and cats. Our first dog, it was Chuck's first dog ever. We went to the pound, the animal rescue, and he picked out a tiny little white and brown pit bull mix. And he was so funny. He's going around saying, he was 30, you were 30, I think. This is my first dog, I got a puppy, it's my first dog. He named him Pita, P-I-T-A, for pain in the ass. And the dog lived up to the name. Pita's claim to fame was her strength, pit bull, and determination. One day we tied her to a small tree in the backyard. We went off to work. We come home at the end of the day. She's roaming the neighborhood, carrying the uprooted tree behind her around the neighborhood. Then we also had, we have a couple of labs, but we had a Labrador retrievers. We had a black lab named Bubba, and our family was vacationing at a lake in Kentucky one time, and Bubba, of course, being a lab, loves to swim, so was out swimming and went around the bend and disappeared, was gone a long time. We were getting very worried. Where's Bubba? Where's Bubba? Finally, Bubba comes swimming back, pushing with her nose a floating telephone pole. Now, Chuck and I decided to retire young. I had been a professor at the University of Cincinnati. I was 56 when we retired. He was 58, and we decided to move to Asheville. And when I saw what a crazy pet-loving city Asheville and Greater Asheville is, I created a website, I printed up business cards, I went and I bought a couple of cases of those thin blue plastic poop bags, and I started a business called Pet Care Extraordinaire. So that was very different from my previous career. As a pet sitter, I'm no longer the professor, donning skirted suits with crisp white blouses and high heels and didn't have to wear mascara or lipstick. I was no longer lecturing to freshmen or reading students' papers. Rather than grading master's theses, I was now picking up dog feces. And I loved it. I love it. Spend my time running through open fields with dogs or playing with cats or kittens in my lap. I don't stay overnight anymore, but I used to stay overnight at people's houses, and many a cold winter night I'd be sleeping with a big old hound dog cozied up against me, keeping me warm. So I then was this crazy pet lover was now being paid to love other people's pets. What a deal. But just like with Mike and Harry, there have been some disasters. The first disaster was Iggy. I show up for my intake appointment and I knock at the door and a little 6-year-old boy comes and says, "Hi, come on in." And his mother's behind him. And he takes me into the living room and points to a big glass sort of aquarium-like cage and says, this is Iggy. Iggy's from Mexico and Iggy's 12 years old. There in the glass aquarium is a 4-foot-long iguana with this oversized head, this long body, and a tip of a tail. And it was a grayish green, slimy looking big thing. And it had these comb-like spikes on its back and bulging eyes on either side of the head. If you've ever seen an iguana, the eyes are at front, either side of the head. And it had these razor-sharp looking teeth. So the mom explained all I'd have to do on every other day visit is feed Iggy about a dozen live crickets. And she kept the crickets in a mason jar in the kitchen. And on every visit, I was to take a handful of this cricket chow, kind of like a wheat bran looking stuff, and put it in the jar so the crickets could eat it and multiply, and give Iggy on a little measuring cup, 1/8 of a cup of his 12 crickets. Yeah, a piece of cake. I hadn't been big on reptiles. We'd never owned reptiles, but how hard could this be to do this every other day? So I get there at my first visit, and I'm in the kitchen, and I unscrew the lid, and I turn to get unscrew the lid of the crickets, and I turn to get the measuring cup, and within seconds, all the crickets have hopped out of the jar. Within seconds, they are everywhere. They're in the living room, they're under the couch, they're on the table, they're crawling up the walls. And there's Iggy. He hasn't eaten in 2 days now. And he sees and hears crickets everywhere. The cricket noise was deafening. He's banging himself against the glass aquarium. He's going left, right, up and down. His tail is hitting. So I go to the kitchen and I get a coffee mug and I go around the house trying to scoop up as many crickets as I can. I get some, and I put it in the mason jar and I put the cricket chow in and I feed him his 12 crickets. And I do this, every other day for a week and a half or so. And so Iggy survived. He survived the week and a half of my pet care. But every time I went in that house, and I'm sure when the people came back after their vacation, you could hear that faint sound of crickets all over the house. Let's see, my next catastrophe is Big Louie. I walked a dog named Big Louie 5 days a week for many, many years. And Big Louie lived in North Asheville, and there were sidewalks everywhere. And now Big Louie is a bull mastiff. If you know bull mastiffs, 140 pounds. I weigh 115. When Louis would be standing, his head would come almost up to my shoulder. I had a harness I put on Big Louis, and I had control of him. And as I say, I walked him 5 days a week for years. I had control of him because I would keep treats in my pocket, and as we're walking, I would scan the landscape to see if there was a squirrel or a bird or a cat or anything. And if there was, I'd make him sit, face me, and I'd hold up the treat, and he would be focused on me, and I would do that, keep his attention on me until the squirrel or critter went away. And that worked for years. I had total control of Big Louie. Till one day, we're out walking, and his harness is on him, and we're walking down the sidewalk, and from the minute we get outside, he's sniffing the air, sniffing the air. I hadn't seen that before, didn't know what it was about. We go around the corner, there are 3 bear cubs, like a few feet from us. So I jump on Big Louie, I wrestle him down to the ground. The bear cubs run away. Louis drags me across the pavement. I mean, I'm scraped up, I'm bleeding and all. So I drag him back home, I clean myself up, and I no longer walk Big Louie. But I do miss him. So every so often I call his, you can't say dog owners anywhere, you gotta say pet people. I call his pet people, pet parents, and arrange for a play date in his yard. So I still get to see Big Louie. And then the third catastrophe, we'll call it what it is Maria. Maria also lived in North Asheville. She had 3 cats. And I went to visit, again, get my instructions, get my key and everything. And she tells me Pablo is a feral cat that she had just lured into the house a few weeks before. He didn't want any part of people. He just hid under the bed. And I was to keep the bedroom door closed. And I'd just go in, leave his food, scoop his litter, and not even see Pablo. Then there was Billy, who was really old, and most of his fur was missing. You could see his ribs protruding. And I had to liquefy Billy's food because he couldn't even chew. I don't think he had teeth anywhere, he couldn't even chew. And Maria left me a permission to euthanize note for the week she was gone because she told me Billy had cancer and may not live the week. The third cat was a kitten called Mr. Wiggles. This ragdoll kitten, lots of fur, lovely, high energy. When I first went to meet them all, Maria had a laser pointer, and Mr. Wiggles was chasing the laser pointer all over the house, trying to run up the walls. So she goes away on her trip, and I go each day to take care of these cats. Well, as soon as I arrive, Mr. Wiggles meets me at the door. Oh, hi, you're here, let's play. I don't see Pablo at all, and I liquefy Billy's food and watch him slurp it down and then go to sleep. So it's the last day of my visit. I'm like, oh, thank God that Billy stayed alive. I didn't have to have this cat euthanized, or he didn't die on my care. So I'm getting ready to leave the house, but I sit down on the floor one last time and coax Mr. Wiggles into my lap, and I'm petting him and playing with him and all of a sudden, he starts coughing. He's coughing. Then he's like gasping for breath. Then he has a seizure. His limbs are out straight and trembling. He falls over dead on the floor. Oh my God, I'm beside myself. What do I do? I go to the bathroom, and she had these turquoise towels. I get a turquoise towel. I put Mr. Wiggles in it. I wrap him real tight, take him out to the trunk of my car, put it in, and I drive home really slowly so he doesn't roll around back there. I get home, I compose myself, and I call Maria. I'm like, oh, Maria, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Mr. Wiggles just died in my lap just now. Billy lived, but Mr. Wiggles just died. I don't know what happened. I'm sobbing. I'm all upset. There's silence. And then I hear, oh, Cindy, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Bless your heart. Would you do me a favor? Would you put Mr. Wiggles in the freezer for me? When I come home, I want to have a little service with my friends and bury him under the maple tree in the backyard. Okay, sure, I say, sure. Hang up the phone, I turn to Chuck. And I say, Chuck, I can't do it. Can you do it? Can you come with me and do it? Now here's Chuck, who, not so much anymore, but back then hated my pet care business, hated I had a pet care business, was embarrassed that I used to be a professor and now I pick up dog crap for a living. And I say, please, please help me. And like any good husband, he goes, yes, dear. So we drive back to Maria's house. He's driving, again, really slow, so Mr. Wiggles is not rolling around back there. He takes him out. We go into the kitchen. He takes him out of the turquoise towel, and he's ready to put him in the freezer. And I'm like, no, 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 stop. No, no, no. You got to put him in so it looks like he's resting peacefully. You got to put his head on his paws. Got to wrap his tail around him, you know, that classic sleeping cat pose. So he does that, and he puts Mr. Wiggles in the freezer between the frozen blueberries and the green peas. So I love doing this. I have great joy. I probably shouldn't be telling these stories because there are a few, I think, of my pet care clients here tonight. I swear I won't kill or lose your pet, you know. But I love it. I've cared for horses, chickens, hamsters, iguana, parrots, goldfish. I'll care for anything except snakes.
Yeah.
And so I very much appreciate your hearing the confession of this crazy pet lover. Thank you.
That was great.
Folks, I have to have a confession here. Cindy and I just came back from a 40-hour failed plane trip from Montreal that ended up in a bus ride to Boston and a flight back to Charlotte. So in 40 hours, we've had exactly 4 hours of sleep. But I'm not here to whine. I'm here to introduce someone who I consider to be a great, great friend. I met Wallace Bohanan about, I guess it's been maybe 2 years. And Wallace and I are in a men's group together, and there's another fellow back there hiding out because he doesn't want to be associated with us. Hi, Steve. And our next teller is a phenomenal person as well as a teller. His personal history is amazing. Wallace Bohanan grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And if you've ever seen the movie The Heights, that's kind of the life that Wallace had. His father was a Cub master and a Boy Scout leader. Wallace was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout. And then he tried to avoid what we call the Vietnam War, which back then was also called the Indochina War, by enlisting so that he wouldn't have to go to Nam. It didn't work out that way, and he ended up going to Nam, and that's a whole other story. But he came back, and he faced racism like he had never experienced before. So what do? If you go to the African American Museum at the Smithsonian, the first thing you see is you'll see a man with his fist up as a Black Panther. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you a man that went from Black Panther to Buddhist to the most wonderful, caring, thoughtful human being I've gotten to know over the last few years. My friend and soon to be yours, Wallace Bohanan.
Put you in a minute. Okay.
You got it.
I can hear myself. Greetings, greetings, greetings. I have a little microphone head up on here. This is technical stuff. All right. Yeah, I had a life. Interesting one. It was late February 1967. And it was hot. I was in Vietnam on a combat base, maybe about 40 minutes ride from North Vietnam. Combat base wasn't so big, took maybe 30, 40 minutes to walk around the perimeter. On this base, we had infantry, artillery, mortars, tanks, anti-aircraft guns. Now, there were no airplanes to shoot down, so we used to use the anti-aircraft guns against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army. This is that kind of story, but bear with me. So one evening, with my buddies, call them brothers, call ourselves brothers. Now, if you're back from that age, you know the brothers talking about black men, black soldiers. And where we were, up there in the north part of South Vietnam, near the DMZ, was heavy combat zone. And there were a lot of brothers there. As a matter of fact, if you were a soldier, white soldier, and you came to a unit where there were a lot of black soldiers, you knew you were in the combat zone and some stuff was gonna happen. So here we were. My unit was an artillery unit. We had these 175 big, long barrel guns to shoot into other countries, Laos and North Vietnam and like that. They were long range, so we didn't get too much of that in close fighting. Here we were, all together, happy to be together, black men drinking warm beer, smoking that Vietnamese marijuana. Oh yeah, take 2 puffs, pass it. By the time I get back around to you, you say, no, I'm done. So there we were getting high, singing along to Motown tunes, you know, my girl, my girl. Okay, so we're having a good time. We had a conversation, and one of the conversations, we were talking about how a Vietnamese woman who worked there on the base got caught trying to take out a map. She drew a map, pinpointed every spot, every gun, every emplacement we had on the base. She got caught, she started running away, bam, bam, shot her dead. In the meantime, we had not been attacked there for months, not since I've been there. In fact, it was so quiet that the administration and headquarters people were talking about putting flowers out. Yeah, make the base look nice. So we finished doing the talking, and my turn for guard duty. So I'm walking around, I'm still high, you know, I'm singing Motown tunes, and one of the infantry guys in the Marines was like, shut up! I'm thinking like, what? Like, does he think this is a secret that we're here? Everybody knows we're here, why should I have to be quiet? So I kept on singing. And he shot at me. Oh yeah, this is Vietnam. Okay, so I'm running down the street, oh man, you know, because a guy shot at me, you know. I got my pistol belt on, and I have the ammo, and I got my canteen, and my mess kit, and my gas mask, and flak jacket, and my rifle, and helmet, and I'm running, jingling and making all kinds of noise. Get out of breath, and I stop, turn around, didn't shoot at me anymore. And I couldn't figure out why, you know what? Was he shooting at me because I was making a noise and attracting the Viet Cong, or he didn't like my singing? I don't know. Anyway, I finished my guard duty stuff and wearily got back into my tent. We had about 12 men, 6 on each side of the tent. And I got down in line and took off my clothes and put all my gear down quietly. I was still tipsy, fell asleep. So somewhere in the night, about midnight, I had a dream. And I'm hearing these explosions, and they're getting closer and closer and closer. And by this time, I'm starting to wake up, and I'm realizing this is not a dream. And here comes my friend Portis. He was on guard duty now, and he's running down the company street shouting, mortars, mortars, get out of bed, mortars. Things coming, so everybody, by this time, everybody getting out of bed, and they're getting their gear and putting their clothes on. I'm out of my bed looking for my stuff. explosion comes nearby, you know, people are hollering and, oh boy, it's like crazy. I look on the floor, I can't find my clothes. I go under my bed, reaching around, I can't find my clothes. Finally, it dawned on me, your clothes are not there, you better put your gear on and get outside. Because that's where the shelter was. So I get my gear together and I run outside and I jump. I'm the last one out there. Jump into this little enclosure. It's about that high. It's a big round thing, sandbags. Jumped in there. That was the drill. You jump in there and sit up. About here, my shoulders. So I exposed the whole top part of my body. Stuff is still coming in, and I'm the only one in there. I look around. Guys are saying, Bohanan, get over here, get over here. They were next to a sandbag wall about that high. Everybody's laying down flat. So I ran over there and I laid down. Whew. Artillery still coming in, rockets, mortars, and even worse than that. Well, maybe not worse than that, but for me, I didn't know the difference. Stuff was going out. Because by now, everybody on that base was on point. Everybody who had a job to do, fire back, that's what they would do. And they were loading them mortars, artillery, boom, you know, so this stuff was going out, things are coming in, like this. I'm going crazy because I'm scared to death laying down next to that sandbag wall with no clothes on. Oh, I have all my underwear, okay. So then I see tracer bullets coming across there, you know, and I was saying, oh, stuff. And everybody else in there was saying the same thing. They're getting ready to come through our wire. Let's get locked and loaded. And we locked and load that sucker up, and we're sitting there, still scared. Stuff still coming in, stuff still going out. The mortar crew that was across the street from us, the guys are loading the mortars and throwing them out there. And all of a sudden, a round came there where we were. Boom! And I knew somebody got hit because they started screaming. The guy there was calling from, you know, the medic, medic, medic. And the guy said, fuck the medic, send me some more ammunition. I want to put these mortars out here. I said, man, that's a real thing. People actually do that. But that's what was happening. And I was never so glad to say, thank you, keep firing. I know you're hurt and all, but keep putting no mortars out there because we need some protection. By now, everything's going crazy. It's loud, the racket, the smell of the gunpowder, and then it stopped. And Lieutenant comes around and tells us how everything was. It's okay, they haven't got through the wire, you're gonna be all right. And then he said, unload your weapons. Because I want to come back around here, I don't want you shooting me. So we unloaded our weapons, took a breath, and then it started again. All over the camp, people are hollering, screaming, sending the rounds back out, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm shivering, you know? Now, I'm thinking it's because it's cold, I don't have any clothes on, but might have been because I was scared, okay. We'll give him that. And this young guy, he's about 18 years old. I call him young, I was, what, 20 and a half? Young guy, anyway. Put his arms around me. It's going to be all right, Bohanan. And he was kind of comforting me. I'm saying, are you sure it's going to be all right? He said, yeah, it's going to be all right. I said, okay, okay. And believe me, I was never so glad to have a man put his arm around me as that night. You know, this is going to be a pretty long night. And that's the way it went all night long. They would fire, light us up, we'd fire back, then they would stop. And they started, this went on all night long. Finally, dawn came. And I'm like, okay, it's dawn. A little bit foggy out there, but we'll be okay. And they hit us again. Coming in again. I'm like, oh no, isn't it gonna stop? When's it gonna stop? But it did. That was the last barrage. They went on about their business. So everybody's now getting up and, you know, attending to the wounded and counting the dead, hearing the stories. So I'm the last one to go back in my tent. I wanted to see if there were any shrapnel holes in the tent from the artillery. was if there were no holes there. I figured, well, I could have slept all night long, not even worried about it, and I wouldn't have been hit. So I walk in the tent. I'm the last one in because, I'm waiting to make sure nothing else is coming in before I go from against that wall. Walk in there, and there's my clothes, neatly stacked on the floor. I know I didn't miss them. As it turned out, the guys in my tent there decided they would take my clothes and hide them from me. And I get up in the morning and we'd all have a big laugh about the prank they pulled. It was morning and nobody was laughing. Yeah. Now I got through that, and there were more artillery barrages, more combat through my tour of duty. That was just the first one. But I managed to survive those traumatic, terrifying experiences. And since then, my life has been interesting. Yeah, I had an interesting life. But I lived it well. I mean, I lived it fully. Something about that experience taught me how precious life was, not to take it for granted, to really get engaged, involved. And I was. Ups and downs, not everything went well. I have other stories I can tell you. If you've heard them, you know, yeah, okay, won't go there. Just that my life had changed. And I really, really am, I guess, blessed and happy because of the VA and their therapy, because of the fact that I'm a practicing Buddhist now. I'm retired, got a lovely, wonderful girlfriend. And if it wasn't for that, and honestly, good people like you, yeah, now I feel like I can stand here and tell my story. Thank you.
Bohanan, welcome. Well, I'm very excited to introduce our next teller. If you grew up in Weaverville and you're now maybe 20, 25, 30, our next teller is a very, very, very special person. She is the face of learning in Weaverville. Our next teller is Jill Totman. Jill. Jill retired from the Weaverville Library after 32 years? 35 years of service. So when I say the kids of Weaverville identify Jill as the mentor, as the person that brings education to life, that is our friend Jill Totman. Jill is on the minds and the hearts of every kid in Weaverville. And now she's going to be on your hearts as well. Jill Totman.
Thank you. Thanks. So this is a story that I learned from a Choctaw storyteller named Tim Tingle. I've heard him tell this story, and he also published it in his book called Stories of Light and Dark. And this is how it goes. Long time ago, in the land of the Choctaw, there lived a boy who had a very unusual name. His name was No Name. Back in those days, you had to earn a name by being especially swift or slow or clever or clumsy, and you would be named accordingly. Well, No Name was neither swift nor slow, neither clever or clumsy. He was so very average that he had no name. Now you can imagine how his father liked that. When No Name was 5 years old, his father woke him up one morning and shook him and said, No Name, No Name, go hunting, go fishing, do something. How can I be proud of a son who has no name? Well, the boy leaped up and ran out, went behind his house where he had planted a small oak tree, and it bent with his weight as he leaned against it. And he cried, and she came. He was 5 and she was 4. Her name was Whispering Wind because no one could hear her coming. Even the sycamore leaves didn't crackle when she stepped upon them. And she came up behind No Name, and she moistened her lips, and she kissed him on the earlobe, and he jumped and said, What? Huh? And she said, No name, no name. I will always love you, even though you have no name. And he said, Yuck, leave me alone, silly girl. And he ran off into the woods. But when he thought about her, he would smile. Then he grew to be 10 years old, and his father was even more impatient. He woke him again one morning, shook him awake, and said, No Name, get up. Go hunting, go fishing, do something. How can I be proud of a son who has no name? Well, he ran out again behind his house. He leaned up against that tree. It was stronger and could bear his weight. And as he cried, she came. Up from behind him, she moistened her lips and kissed him on the earlobe. And she said, No name, no name. I will always love you, even though you have no name. And he said, Oh, I should have known it was you. Love me if you must, but leave me alone. And he went out into the woods. But he started thinking, she's getting kind of pretty. And then he grew to be 12 years old. And in the old ways, a 12-year-old became an adult in the Choctaw tribe. And No Name and all the other children were taken down to the river for a ceremony. They were taken one at a time into the river by a wise elder who would whisper to them words meant only for them, words for life. Well, No Name took the hand of the elder, and the elder led him into the river, and he whispered into his ear, he said, Be brave. Go into it. They need you. You will know when. And as he walked into the water, No Name felt the power of the water and the words swirling around him, and he wondered what they meant. After the last child came out of the river, all the 12-year-olds were taken to the central fire, and they were told by the elders the ways of the Choctaw people, who might be their friend, who might be their enemy, and all of their traditions of generosity and giving. And they were welcomed into the adult world of the Choctaw. Late in the day when he went home, No Name went in his house, and there was his father standing with his arms open. And he said, No Name, today I am proud. But when he heard himself say his son's name and the word proud, old feelings began to boil up inside of him. And he tried to hold back the words, but he could not stop himself. He said, No Name, nothing has changed. How can I be proud of a son who has no name? And he took his hand and pushed No Name by the chest. He went out of the door and stumbled to the ground. And when he saw the look on his son's face, he reached out with his hands to take the words back. But words once uttered can never be taken back. No Name put his hands in front of his face to block the words, but words can never be blocked by hands. And for the first time, No Name knew what it felt like, the pain of being an adult. Not just the tears on his cheeks, but the pain, the sob in his heart. And when he got up and went behind the house, there she was, whispering wind. And she had heard. Everyone had heard. It was a thing of shame in the village. But she said to him, with tears on her own cheeks, she said, "No name, no name. You know what I say is true. I will always love you, even though you have no name." And he gave her a small smile and said, "At least somebody does." And as he walked into the woods, she took him by the hand, and for the first time they walked together. And he said again, "At least somebody does." And then he grew to be 16. 16-year-olds in the way of the Choctaw can become warriors if war is declared. And the 16-year-old boys, they prayed for war. They said, "We can earn new and better names." And No Name thought, or I could earn a name at all. But the elders, they prayed for peace because they knew that with war came death. And in this old story, the prayers of the young were answered. 20 Creek men came onto Choctaw territory. And so a scouting party was sent out to determine what their intentions were. And when they came back, they told the elders, they said, "They are not here to make war. They have no weapons. All they have is tools to cut firewood. They are only here to get firewood." And the elders said, "It is too far for them to carry firewood to their homes. Watch them." But that night the scouts fell asleep, and those Creek warriors, they brought their firewood and they set it next to the homes of the Choctaw people, and they lit them on fire and they fled. When the Choctaw people woke up and they saw what was happening, they formed a basket brigade and brought water up from the river and put those fires out. Luckily, no one was hurt, but several homes were damaged or destroyed, and war was declared on the creek. Now, the 16-year-olds, No Name among them, were given new weapons and taught the ways of the warrior. And they had a ceremony, a fire ceremony, where they could get strength and get the spirit of the warrior in them. And as they followed the Creeks out of their town, they passed behind No Name's house, and there she was, whispering wind. And she kissed him lightly on the earlobe, and she said, "No Name. Bring back a brave name if you must, but come back to me, for I will always love you, even though you have no name." And he said, "I will earn a strong and brave name." And she realized that he had not truly heard her message. Well, the Choctaw followed the Creeks. They left an easy trail to follow. They followed the Creeks into their own territory in the limestone mountains of what we now call Georgia. They followed them to the mouth of a cave. Their footprints went into the cave, and the young Choctaws said, "Ah, they have all gone in this cave. There is no exit. We can slay them all." But the elders said, "Be careful. It might be a trick." Well, they left No Name outside to guard the entrance to the cave. And then all of the young Choctaws, with their weapons raised, went running into the cave, and the elders were swept along in this charge. But when they got to the back of the cave, there were no creek there. There were 100 creek hiding among the boulders on the mountain outside of that cave. And when they saw that all the Choctaw were inside, they came out with a gate that they had built especially to cover the mouth of this cave. It was made of pine branches covered in resin that would burn hot and fast. And the crossbars were made of green cypress to burn slow and smoky. And they knocked out No Name and pulled him aside so there would be one left to tell the story. And they lit the gate on fire and they blew the smoke into the cave. Well, the Choctaw ran toward the entrance, but they were beaten back by the heat of the fire, and they tried to find pockets of air to breathe, but soon they were breathing smoke, and soon they began to die. Only one young man survived by keeping his face close to the ground where the smoke would not settle. Well, when the Creek saw that the Choctaw were all dead, they left and they went home. And when No Name woke up and he saw the burning gate, he ran to it and grabbed it with his hands, but he couldn't move it. It was too heavy, and he could smell the burning of his own flesh. He stepped back and he remembered the words from the river. Be brave. Go into it. So he stepped back up to the gate. Be brave. Go into it. And he wrapped his arms around the crossbeams and he rocked back and forth and back and forth, and the gate became loose and then it fell right on top of him. Well, the one left in the cave leaped out and he tried to pry that gate up off of No Name, but the heat was burning so strong, so hot. Finally, he pried it up with a branch, and underneath it lay No Name, dried up, brown like a peach on a rock in the summertime. His skin was brown and swollen and wrinkled, and he was taking his last breath. Back in those days, the people said there were some among them that had the spirit touch, and this one man was one of them. He took his fingertips and put them to No Name's temples, and he called out, Hotipama, Hotipama, and his spirit left his body and went to the beyond, and No Name's spirit came into his body. It was a very strange feeling to be inside the body of another, and some say for days and some say for weeks, he wandered, trying to discover who he was. The people came from Choctaw Town, and they took their loved ones home to be buried and grieved. And when Whispering Wind saw what was left of No Name, she grieved too, but she was angry. She said, he should have known. I would always love him. He said he would come back to me. And when she got home, she took to her bed. She would not eat or drink. They would bring her food and water, and she would just break the vessels. And she grew thinner and thinner, and the life began to leave her. Then one day, No Name, in the body of another, came into the town, and he told the elders about the battle and what happened at the cave. And then he went to Whispering Wind's house, and he asked her mother if he could see her. Her mother looked strangely at this person she had never seen before, but she agreed. And No Name went in and knelt down next to Whispering Wind, and he said, it is I, No Name. I have come back to you. And she opened her eyes with hope, but then she saw the face of another, and she said, you, go away. and with her last strength, she pushed him by the chest until he fell out of the door and lay on the ground, and it reminded him of the time his father had done the same thing. And he felt the sobbing in his heart and the tears on his cheeks, and he thought, how can I let her know who I am? And then the answer came to him, just like the sobbing in his heart. And he got up and went back inside and knelt beside her, and he moistened his lips, and he kissed her on her earlobe. And he said to her, just as you did for me. So many times when we were small, you would come to me and say, no name, no name. I will always love you even though you have no name. Only I could know this. I have come back to you. Come back to me. And when she opened her eyes, she saw the spirit of no name in the face of this other. And he brought her berries and water, and she ate and drank and gradually regained her strength. And a week later, without telling anyone who he was, No Name and Whispering Wind were married. And at the end of the month, the period of grieving and mourning ended, and all the Choctaw people got together to tell stories about the loved ones they had lost. The last to stand up to tell the story was the father of No Name. And the people were nervous. They had never heard him say a nice word about his son. But his father stood up and said, you should be nervous. I should be ashamed. I loved him so, and I never told him. I never told anybody. I would give my life just to have a few minutes to show him and tell him how much I care. But it is too late now. And he sat down. And now it was the time for the one who had returned to have his new name. And the elders were discussing it when No Name stepped among them and said, please, I would like to choose my own name. And the elders said, that is not done. But when they thought, it was a strange thing, but so was it a strange thing for just one warrior to return from battle. And they agreed. No Name stood before his entire village, and he cast his eyes all around to all the people, and he stopped on his father, and he said, I choose for myself a strong name. I choose for myself a brave name. From now on, you can call me No Name. And his father opened his eyes and looked, and he saw that his son's spirit had returned in the body of another. And his heart burst with pride, and all of the village felt that pride too. No Name and Whispering Wind lived long and happy lives with many children, many grandchildren. And finally, in his 90s, No Name died. And they buried him on top of a hill overlooking the village so the sun would always shine upon him. And after the people had sung, after they had buried him in the ground, and after the people had gone back down the hill to the village, there was one that remained, Whispering Wind. And she knelt on his grave, and she moistened her lips, and she kissed the ground beneath which he was buried. And she said, No Name, I've kept my promise. I will always love you, even though you have no name. Thank you. Our last teller is Chuck Fink, who is kind of all of the head of this crazy crew every time we have storytelling. He started telling stories after taking a class at Ollie at UNCA in storytelling. And he's done numerous shows, personal stories that are known for their angst, drama, and humor. He's created 21 men's groups for aging and retired men. He's a member of the Storytelling Network, the North Carolina Storytelling Guild, the Asheville Storytelling Circle. He had a radio show on WPVM called Storyville, and you can also watch some of those episodes at his website, chuckfinkstoryteller.com. He interviewed top tellers around the country, around the region, around the world. And Chuck and his wife, Cindy, now have a podcast that you can access through his website called In Love with the Finks. And we welcome Chuck Fink.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for all the lies. I really appreciate that. This story I'm going to tell tonight is another father-son story, but this one I call NMI. No middle initial. My father, Joseph NMI Fink, was born in 1914 in Davidson County, Tennessee, otherwise known as Nashville. But how he got there is kind of interesting. My grandparents, Celia and Abraham, immigrated from Poland, Lithuania, around the early 1900s, during the height of the pogroms. If you're not familiar with the pogroms, they are systematic, often government-sponsored, torture, intimidation, and even death of Jews in Eastern Europe. Historians say it dates back all the way to the Spanish Inquisition. Well, Abraham and Celia lost their firstborn, pair of twins, in a fire set by the Cossack thugs. So with that, they immigrated to America. And my father was actually their sixth child. He had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and then another sister followed. NMI, that name came from his dog tags in World War II. My father's name was Joe Fink, plain ordinary Joe. No middle initial, no middle name. Now, as the story goes, in my family, they lived in Nashville for a while, and when my father was, according to his story, was about 9 or 10, he and a buddy got interested in catalpa bean seeds, which are also called Indian cigars, long green seeds. So these 2 young geniuses figured, Indian cigars, we're going to try and smoke them. So what do? They find a barn, they climb up into the rafters, they light these green catalpa bean seeds, and after a couple of puffs, they turned as green as the seeds. They got sick, and geniuses they were, they just tossed the cigars aside. They were running from the barn, they turned around, and the whole thing was ablaze. That's the reason I think my family moved from Nashville to, let's say it right, Louisville. Not Louisville, it's Louisville. And that's where my dad, he had kind of an indistinguished life in Louisville, except he went to the Louisville Male High School, and he tried out for the football team. He didn't make the team, but he got a little bit bloodied and bruised by one player on the team. If you've ever watched the movies from the 40s and 50s and 60s with a swashbuckling hero, Victor Mature, that's the guy that beat up my dad. Who knows Victor Mature? All right, good stuff. I was a little worried there. Well, from there, my father, they weren't able to afford college. He wanted to become an optometrist, but instead he moved to Cincinnati to follow his older brother, Max. Max had started a business in Cincinnati called McCoy Gold and Refinery. McCoy, that's a very Jewish name, isn't it, McCoy? Well, my father joined him, and this was during the Depression, and they actually did quite well in the Depression. People would be bringing in their old gold and silver, and they would melt it down and make the money. But in 1943, at age 29, it all changed. Three things happened. Not six, but three things happened. The first, Max died suddenly from gangrene that the surgeon forgot to look after. Secondly, Joe Berryman-Fink was drafted, and he became a soldier. Well, actually, what he wanted to do is he wanted to become a pilot. And it didn't work out. Once he clipped the sides of a tree and the branches fell, he then became Staff Sergeant Joe Fink. And his job, his duty was in CBI, Theater of Operations, China, Burma, India. This is when Chiang Kai-shek was fighting the Japanese, and the American forces were bringing all of the materials and supplies to help the Chinese beat the Japanese. Now, my dad wasn't exactly a heroic kind of guy at all, but he did one thing that is still amazing to my family, to me, and to people that are familiar with the hump. The hump is the Himalaya Mountains. And to get to the Burma and India where he was stationed, he had to fly over the hump. And then he had to fly back another time, and then he flew back again. The amazing thing is, if you know your American history, the hump took over 600 planes and more than 1,000 soldiers. The Himalaya Mountains were not kind. The avionics that we know today, like maybe oxygen and altimeters and other kind of devices, not heard of. One American you might have heard of was a pilot that went down. His name was Joseph Kennedy Jr., but my dad made it. He also, as I said, he wasn't exactly a hero. When he was stationed, actually he was on the border of Burma and India, part of the duty of a staff sergeant is to develop film. It's late at night, and he's in his tent developing film, and he hears scratches on the tent. It's a tent, you can't knock, so of course you scratch. Come in, nothing. Scratch, scratch, come in, nothing. Then the flaps part, and he sees two huge green eyes. Wrapped around was kind of orange and black, you know, like maybe a Bengal tiger. Brave as he was, instead of grabbing his gun, he shouted out for the MPs as he ran out the back. And how do I know this story? Because until I was about 4 years old, we had a tiger skin rug. Until the highest level of the food chain destroyed that tiger skin rug, the moths. Well, my dad, actually it was tough for him. After Max died and my dad was in the war, the business kind of went south. And he came back and he tried to build it back, but he never was really successful. We lived in a small apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, and he was always struggling. But he had some side gigs, and as a kid, I loved his side gigs. One was he would go to motels in the greater Cincinnati area, these roadside motels, and he put coin boxes on the side of the TV so the residents would have to drop in a quarter to watch their favorite program. I loved this because I got to go with him a couple of times when he went to collect. And this one time he was having a beer with his client. And while I'm sitting there, my dad says, "Hey, Chuck, you want to try this?" "Sure." Ugh, I couldn't believe how bad it was until I was 15, and then I could do it illegally, and then it was great. Until one time I came home, and I was like 15, 16. I went immediately to the bathroom and gave up all my beer, as you might imagine. My dad, amazingly, and when I told him, I said, "Oh, I just went to Frisch's and had a Big Boy and fries." Frisch's is kind of like Bob's Big Boy in the greater Cincinnati area. Frisch's Big Boy. So I told him I had too much of that Big Boy, and that's why I was heaving and hoeing. And like totally unexpected, he just said, "Oh yeah, those big boys can do it to you, Chuck. That's all right." He knew, but he gave me a pass. The other side gig that I loved, I was a little kid, 5 or 6. I used to run downtown Cincinnati to a store, and I'd reach out my arms, and he would grab me. But his side gig was really special. His side gig was opening up a toy store next to his store downtown. So this little 4 or 5-year-old Jewish kid would run down to see his father, and when his father picked him up and grabbed him into the toy store, That was Santa Claus. And to this day, this still Jewish guy celebrates Christmas every year because I still think there's a Santa Claus. Well, my dad, back in, I might have missed this, in 1943, he also married my mother. My mother, Ella, that's a very popular name now, Ella. Back then, it was the Eastern European name. My mother's family was from Minsk, Belarus. Actually, it was a shtetl, which is village in Yiddish, around Minsk. My mother was a narcissist. Let me amend that. A professional might say she was an extreme narcissist. But my father loved my mother till the day he died. He almost worshiped her. He always catered to my mother. Well, as time went on, my father and I also had a little bit of scrapes. I was a teenage kid. He was my father. And then I went off to college. We were not wealthy at all, but I managed to get enough scholarships and grants to go to the George Washington University in DC. Anybody else a GW person? Whoa, we have to talk. Well, this was 68 to 70, and after 70, my mother's narcissism had an impact on me, and I had to drop out of school. We'll get to that in another story. But in 1968 to 1970, this kid from the Midwest, this kid that was from a conservative household, became a far-out hippie, left-wing, pot-smoking college student on the front lines of any demonstration that was there. You just roll out of bed and there was a moratorium. It was easy stuff. But I came back. And of course, I volunteered for the George McGovern campaign. As a volunteer, I was given a list of names to call. Now, this is Cincinnati. You call that name, I'm calling on behalf of the George McGovern campaign, boom, boom. Every single call slammed in my ear. It was awful. And then I saw on the list the name, Joseph Fink, 5130 Reading Road, 242-5487. That's my dad. That's my family. Oh, that's great. Finally, someone will not hang up on me. So I thought I would play a little joke. I disguised my voice. Mr. Fink, I'm calling on behalf of the George McGovern campaign for president. You son of a bitch. How dare you call this number for that commie pinko? Dad, it's me. It's your son, Chuck. I don't give a goddamn who it is. Don't you ever call this number again for that commie pinko. Yeah, it was a bit of a difficult dinner that night. But my mother's narcissism actually paid off when she said something to the effect like, I am tired of you two guys always picking on each other and all you're doing is talking to each other. What about me? I'm here. Pay attention to me. Well, actually what we did is we realized maybe we should take it down a notch or two. And we did. And I actually had a very good relationship with my father for many years. And then in 1980, the phone rang. Actually, in 1980, I met this wonderful, wonderful, lovely lady from Fall River and in Westport, Massachusetts, and we were married. We were married in Tiverton, Rhode Island. Normal people would say Tiverton, but down there, or up there, they say Tiverton. We were married at this beautiful place, and my parents were there with my sister and her husband, and amazingly, they were the first to leave, right after dinner, and we found out later why. My mother said not enough attention was being paid to her, and they left. Wow. Needless to say, over those few years, there were times where I just had to back off away from them for my own mental health reasons. And whenever I did, I cared so much about my dad. I knew he had a bad heart. I was wondering, how is he doing? I really worry about him. So I contacted my cousin Jerry in Louisville. Jerry was the family attorney, big guy too. And everybody took Jerry's consultations seriously. Well, I told Jerry my concerns, and Jerry miraculously was able to get my father and me together for a few lunches while we were supposedly not talking. It warmed my heart. This was 1980, and then in 1984, when our first son was born, she did it again, and I had to back away. I'm at the hospital Sundays in the delivery room. My parents are there, and all they could talk about was my mother and my sister. And it just got to me. I couldn't handle it anymore, so I backed away again. Jerry again was able to intervene so that my father and I could get together. It was a blessing. But in 1989, our second son, Greg, was born. And Cindy so lovingly said, "Don't you think it's about time your parents know they have another grandson?" So I called them back, and the rapprochement, the healing began. It was amazing. All of a sudden, from all this pain and disliking and distaste, we came together again as a family. It was maybe, September. It was a cold, brisk day. My parents came over. I was out in the front yard with the two kids, doing what fathers and sons always do, wrestling, playing, chasing each other, rolling around in the grass. You come in, and my father is by the window. He says, "Come here." He looks at me straight in the eye, puts his arm around me. He said, "Chuck, you are a much better father to your son than I ever was to you." All that tension, the George McGovern thing, the absent father because of masonry, it all went away. And by the way, speaking of masonry, my father not only joined the Masons, he dove in like that Mexican cliff diver, and he went through every possible rank the masonry offered. He became a 33rd degree Mason, which is a big highfalutin honor. He became a master of his lodge, going through the chairs. Then he became district deputy grand master of this region around Ohio, where he would be the supervisor of the other lodges. And then he was elected or nominated or appointed to the Grand Lodge of the state of Ohio. The amazing thing about this, folks, is we're Jewish. There are not many Jewish men that rise to that level in masonry. My dad had, some people said, a heart of gold. I think he had a heart like a hotel. It had room for everybody. And that beautiful, wonderful heart, I still get choked up about this, finally gave out on January the 25th, 1995. It was a cold, awful winter. There was maybe 3, 4, 5 inches of snow on the ground. It was below 20 to 25. No one should have been to that funeral home. But that day, there were more than 200 people at the Wild Funeral Home paying homage to just plain old regular Joe, NMI, no middle initial. That man is in my heart every day, every time, every minute. And I hope now, after this story, he's also in a bit of your heart as well. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you all. Folks, bring up here Jill, Cindy, Wallace, come on up. I'm only going to do this to one of the tellers. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, folks, before you leave, Joe just reminded me, because I have no memory left after 40 hours without sleep. We have some upcoming shows that I think you all want to keep your ears to the ground for. On September the 1st, Peggy Ratus and the Love Bubbles will be appearing here for free. If you're not familiar with the music in Nashville, or if you are familiar, you know Peggy Ratus. On September the 7th, I taught a class. Hi there, Marlo, how are you? Marlo, and where's Deb? There's Deb. 2 of the students from my class. They will be performing for the first time in this room. And let me tell you something. These may seem to be titled rookies. They ain't rookies. These folks are really good. You're going to love it. That's September the 7th. October the 31st, we're bringing in Kim Whitecamp and Connie Reagan Blake for a super concert here. And that's, again, October 31st. Am I missing anything?
That's all.
Oh, okay. That's all, folks. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming.
I was in Autumn Players with you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, very shortly I joined one of your men's clubs the first one. I wasn't interested in that. But I am interested in telling stories. I got a lot of stories, not only...
Oh, yeah, Wayne, yeah.
Yeah, military,